Welcome back. Joining us today is State's Attorney Jodi Hoos in Peoria County, running to maintain this spot at this point. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I want to go ahead and start. You've been in the role already serving, appointed to replace Jerry Brady, who passed away last year. For you so far, what changes would you say you've already made, if any, within the role to this point?
I think the biggest changes at this point have just been the hiring of attorneys through either retirement or just the natural transition of people in their careers. I've had to replace 7 attorneys, and in an office of just under 30 attorneys, that's a big percentage. Some of those were in my chief, my first assistant, my chief of charging, chief of juvenile, chief of criminal. So that's probably been one of the biggest things that I think as an outsider, you know, your average citizen would never know that's occurring, but putting those people in that spots trickles down to all the cases that filter through the state's attorney's office. You know, they make those decisions. So even though that's something that the broad public wouldn't see, that's probably one of the biggest things that I've done in my 6 to 7 months.
And when you're looking at potential people to bring in, is there a certain criteria, I guess you can say? Is there something that you're looking for when you're bringing people in? What's your philosophy when it comes to selecting the people who will be going out and being a part of your team?
So I'm a big fan of whenever you're in an elected position that you should represent those, you should adequately reflect those that you represent. In other words, you know, we're a big county. We have a little bit of everything in Peoria County, and I think the state's attorney's office should have that as well. So I look at, obviously, a person's experience, where they are in life, what do they have or what has happened to them in the past that brings them to want to be an assistant state's attorney, or maybe a paralegal with us, maybe a different position. So I look at that, the individual, but I also look, how does that individual fit with the rest of our office? I mean, I have an office of almost 60 employees, so how will they fit? And what is the overall makeup of our office? And is it representative of those we serve? And that's a big issue for me. I'm proud to say I have the most diverse office in the state's attorney in Peoria County that we've ever had. From the top down, obviously I'm the first woman to ever hold this position, so that's something I'm very proud of, that what I've created and the office atmosphere I've created in a short time.
You were a judge, and
Yes.
you made the transition from judge to becoming a state's attorney.
Yeah.
How does that impact your ability to be the state's attorney? Why make that choice to make that move?
Two questions really on that. The first is, how does that impact my role as the state's attorney? I think it gives me such a better perspective. Prior to being a judge, I was almost all criminal. I didn't handle a lot of civil cases. On the bench, I was almost all civil. So now I have the best background that an individual could have. I have the experience on the criminal side and I have the experience on the civil side. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that the state's attorney's office has a big civil caseload. We have a budget that's almost $4 million that I'm responsible for. We represent all the elected officials, we represent county board, we represent the health department and other entities. So I think that civil experience as a judge has helped me. But I also think just being in the role of a judge. You know, you weren't an advocate. You weren't prosecuting a case or defending a case. You were just hearing the facts, listening to them, and applying them to the law. And that's given me such a good lens, a good filter to review things in the state's attorney's office. As far as the other part of that question, you know, why? I get asked that a lot. And there are a lot of reasons that went into it, a lot of personal ones. But it just felt like this moment in my life, this slice of our life, that it was the right thing for me to do, to step aside from the judge role and take on this new challenge.
All right. Can you tell people, remind them, again, background already in practicing law and then being a judge, what are some other things about you that people, just reminding them of where you're from and,
Sure.
and background?
Yeah, you know, I think really what's made me me is unfortunately what happened when I was very young. My dad was killed in a car accident when I was 12, and the case later went to court where I had to testify. Prior to that, my family didn't know any attorneys, certainly didn't know any judges. I had never even been inside a courthouse before. But I saw firsthand the impact that the justice system has good or bad, on a family. And I knew at that point that I wanted to be inside a courtroom. So after law school, I knew I wanted to be a lawyer. I went to law school. After law school, I knew I wanted to be in the prosecutor's office because they're in the courtroom every day. And started in the state's attorney's office in 2000. I was there for about 15 years before I got appointed to the bench, and I was a circuit judge then for about 5 years.
You're running, obviously, to be elected into this position
Yes.
by the general public. What would you say, outside of obviously being the first woman within that role, what else would you say distinguishes you to be the person to maintain your spot as state's attorney?
Well, not only being the first woman, but being the first judge. I mean, I don't know, not even in our state, you would probably have to look nationally, and even then, I don't know if there's been, maybe once or twice, where a judge leaves the bench to take on a role like this. And I think that just says a lot of how I care about the position and how passionate I am about this role, that I would give up being a judge for it. But also just the experience that I learned. I mean, the 5 years on the bench, the cases that I saw and heard, that's invaluable. I mean, you just can't replace that or compare that with any other experience that anyone would have.
And because you are going to see, and you are already seeing, a lot of confidential information, as you know, you're going to have a lot of people within leadership within the community who are going to be reaching out to you so that they can also be helping in their communities. How do you balance that? How do you balance having this confidential information and possibly also having, different social leaders, community leaders trying to come to you to try to figure out what they can or cannot know so that they can help their communities as well? How do you balance all of that?
That's a great question, because that is a difficult part. I, as state's attorney, I want to be as active as I can in the community, and frankly, that was one of the reasons I left being a judge. As a judge, you're very isolated. You hear whatever one case happens to be in front of you at the time, whereas as a state's attorney, I can make a decision that may impact our entire community. So I want to be involved with that community, and I want their feedback from different organizations and different groups. What's going on in your particular neighborhood or your particular lifestyle? What is it that's going on? How can we help? But I have to be sensitive to talking about specific cases. We can always talk about big picture ideas. What do we need to move forward? But when it gets into the nuts and bolts of, well, this particular individual has a case in front of you, I can't discuss those, obviously.
I don't know if you quite clarified if there will be any changes that you look to make still. I mean, within the future, looking forward, if you are to be elected into this position, are there still some changes that you believe need to be made as you're still sifting through and continuing to find your footing within this role as state's attorney?
Yes, and I'm a fan of, I don't think one big change is going to change something overnight. There's not one answer where you can say, hey, this is it, now the world's better. We've cured world hunger. I believe in small changes can add up to big things. One of them is I'm getting a comfort therapy dog for child victims and child witnesses that have gone through traumatic events, have seen traumatic events, to help them navigate the criminal justice system. I want to implement online payment of traffic tickets. I've already worked with the clerk's office, the circuit clerk's office, on that, and I hope to have that up later this summer, where somebody doesn't have to take a day off of work and go into court to pay their traffic ticket. They can do it online. I also want to implement online diversion programs where first-time offenders, the same thing. If you, for example, if you get an underage drinking ticket, you don't have to miss school to come into court. If this is your first offense, go get an alcohol evaluation, maybe do some public service hours, submit proof of that through this program online, and your case won't even go into the system, into the state's attorney's office. So I think technology has advanced in every area but the law, unfortunately. And as a judge, I was the leader of technology and implementing that in the courtrooms. I was the first courtroom in the state to be 100% electronic, and I want to take that same knowledge and same technology and apply it to the state's attorney's office.
All right, well, last question for you. For the voters in Peoria County, why should they elect you to be their state's attorney?
Experience. I think the experience, not only being a judge, but my 15 years prior to that, I've done almost 175 jury trials. I handled close to 50 murder cases. I just don't think that you can replicate that experience anywhere else.
All right. Well, Jodi Hoos running for election in Peoria County State's Attorney to maintain her role that she already sits in at this point. Best of luck to you.
Thank you.